Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of UAP Studies Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host Michael Glosson. How are you doing today,
How's
bud?
it going? I'm
Oh,
doing fantastic, man. I'm really excited about this one.
I love the whole scarf white shirt thing you got going on right now. It
Yeah,
looks
I'm
very elegant.
going
Yeah,
for something between cult leader and art dealer, maybe
yeah.
was
You
my
just
aesthetic
need to
today.
carry like a book and a pipe with you, and you got everybody's intrigue. Like, who is this man? There you
Mm.
go. There you go. And of course, today we got Michael, or Dr. Michael Paul Masters, who is joining us as well. It is, I don't know what, your fourth time on UAP studies now?
They all kind of blend together after a while,
Yeah, because
but
they're so
every
fun.
every time is a pleasure. Yeah, every
Yeah.
time is an absolute joy. So,
Yeah. No, we
I
love
don't know.
having you on, man. Like we really talked you up. Last episode we did I think no, 2 episodes back. We did a book review. And
Oh,
we
cool.
definitely talked about you and your work. And we just think you're one of the coolest freaking guys
Oh,
in
get out of
ufology,
town.
man. You know what I mean? Like
Get out of
you're one of the
town.
hip cats.
I
If
don't know about that.
if I go to conventions and then afterwards everybody's going somewhere and then you're going somewhere for a beer, I'll follow you because I think you're a lot more interesting to talk to
Well,
sometimes than most
not
people.
to burst that bubble, but usually I'm going back to my room to take a nap.
Well, you better be fun drunk. That's what I'm saying.
At the high
we,
school of the
we have a
UAP
good
community,
time.
you were the cool guy.
Oh, you
The
guys
I
are
cool
want to be at
sweet.
your
teacher.
table.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate that. I appreciate that.
No, man, there's been a lot of developments, obviously, since it changes
There
as well,
have,
even for
yeah.
the podcast and people out in the world since we've had you on last. And that's why, we want to have you back on because, what are your thoughts on everything? So we got lots to talk about today. But
Yeah,
Mr. Glosson, is this your first time that you meet Michael Masters?
This is my first time sort of face to face, as it were. We've emailed a few times, and
that's
I get a good
true.
sense of I get a good sense of your personality. I think we jived over emails, so I'm excited to actually do the face to face thing. But I've listened to other interviews with you, but this is the first time I've ever actually gotten to ask you any questions. So
Yeah.
looking forward to it.
Yeah, same. Nice to meet you. And
Yeah.
yeah, looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, we're both sort of academics, or at least have some academic dimension to our lives. So that might be like a new dimension to the discussion that wasn't there
Yeah,
before.
we can commiserate over
Yeah,
that
right?
aspect of our lives.
Exactly.
Sorry
Well,
for
this,
your academic connections
Yeah.
there. It's not
Yeah.
always a happy place, but it's nice too, you do get a different insight being forced through the sieve of graduate school and whatnot.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's I look back and I'm like, I'm glad that I got this out of it, but I'm not sure if it's like just my way of coping. Because I'm
Mm,
not sure I would have done it again. But
yeah,
yeah, getting a PhD does something to you, and I guess you have to just make the best out of it afterwards and say, oh yeah, it was worth it. It was
absolutely.
great.
Yeah, definitely.
is it the expectation that you have as you're going through all these courses, spending all these thousands of dollars on, studying and all that, and then versus the reality of when you actually get to a teaching position and it just like what it is, like the political system of faculties and schools. And that's got to be the disheartening part because there's got to be a passion there for you guys to want to be teachers to begin with. And then sort of just being put through the system grinds you out on the other end going, was it really worth it? Because I always find that, professors almost do better when they branch off on their own and do something
Yeah,
else
it
apart
happens a
from the
lot.
universities, right?
Right. I guess it depends. Like for me, I'm a little jaded over the fact that we have this publisher perish culture. We're forced
Yeah.
to like crank out all the articles to move through the promotion and tenure process. But then the journals make all this money off of them. There's these paywalls and they're getting kickbacks from all the different subscriptions to these journals. And we get nothing. It's like college football players, how their image is being used in Madden and all these places and they get nothing, which I think is changing actually. But yeah, I don't know. That's kind of frustrating to me. Like do all this work, you go through the peer review process, and then it's like, here, enjoy all of the money you made off of my hard work.
Yeah.
But no, it's gratifying, watching students from the beginning of the semester to the end, just how much they grow and learn and change, and advising students, thesis projects, master's, PhD students. It is pretty rewarding, but yeah, no, it's not for everyone. It's a butt ton of work, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. And the amount of money that a university makes off of you too is just sometimes disgusting
Yeah,
compared
especially
to
with the grants. They get a big chunk of your grants. And
So
yeah.
just because you're there and you're submitting papers, they make money off of you?
Not the papers, but they make,
but yeah.
yeah, the indirect costs is what they're called. So you get a grant and they might take 30% of it to keep the lights on. So they say, which is fine. That's an aspect of sharing the wealth, so to speak. And that's worked into the grant that you receive too. But then you might get a course buyout or a little bit of summer money, but you're not really making money off the grant. So a lot of people are confused about that aspect of it. They think we get a grant and we're just, walking around going to strip club and whatnot, but it's not the case. You're funding your research, your equipment, your materials. Yeah, it'd be a lot cooler if it was like that. But no, the university gets a pretty big chunk of that too.
Yeah. And in Canada, I don't know what the process is, but I think they're making money, a lot more money than what they're actually providing services wise to the students. I think even today, like you see just the teachers disheartened by what they're forced to teach and not teach in schools. And then there's the political aspect. It's almost not worth it. I'm worried there's going to be a generation of people who just don't want to be teachers because they've seen what, from their own experience, what it was like for their teachers. And that's a horrible thing. I think it's a time that we do a big overhaul of what universities stand for. And,
well, I think it's also indicative of our culture. We don't value education the way we used to. And that's, you can see that manifested all throughout the world right now, and especially here in the US. And I don't know what it's like in Canada, but there's just a lot of ignorance across the board. Hey, what's that behind you with the little alien head on it?
Like down here?
Over here? Yeah.
Yeah. So that's actually, it's a parcel bag.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I got it's like iron-on thing on it. Dude, great minds think alike. Great minds think alike.
That's funny.
My wife got me this bison,
that's a beautiful bag
thing, and I sewed this patch onto it.
Yeah, dude, it's
really nice.
Well, mine's
that's hilarious. I looked down there and I thought, wait, how can you see that? That wasn't in my shot. And I was like, oh damn, that's yours.
That's awesome.
Same bag with the same alien on it.
Yeah, I gotta glue it back together. I think it's starting to peel off a bit on the side there, but I love it. It glows in the dark too. So if you're out and about at night, it just looks cool, right? I'm a total geek when it comes down to that stuff.
Yeah.
But no, I've never attended, higher education, if you will. So I don't know what the process is like, but even I was thinking about the aspect of teaching this, like ufology is going to be something eventually that is going to need to be taught in the future as we discover more and more, and we're more open about the study of the subject. And I'm sort of worried about, how many
I'm giving a lecture about it. Well, I think those are starting to disappear. I got asked to teach an honors class about my first book. They wanted me to do like each week you go through each chapter of the book and kind of discuss the nuances of the extraterrestrial model and
what was that like? I can't
time
imagine
travel. Well, I couldn't do it that particular semester because I had so many other things going on, but I gave a lecture at the University of Florida, and then I'm giving a lecture here at Montana Tech, and a philosopher invited me to talk about this theory in there next month.
Who's the philosopher?
It's not, I don't think she's more of a general studies professor.
Okay.
I don't think she actually has a degree in philosophy, but is teaching that class for us this year. But yeah, no, it's cool to be able to get into a classroom and have these conversations, because that alone isn't something I thought would be possible 5-10 years ago. But it's cool, like the students are super engaged and really interested in these ideas, and the more obviously UFOs are in the news right now, so it's been
you find students responding to the ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of them are like, whoa, are we really talking about UFOs? Yeah, really well. Engaged, lots of questions, obviously. For many of them, when we have these conversations, we have some background-based level of knowledge regarding the phenomenon, but we're going in raw with these kids, and they oftentimes haven't even thought about what a UFO is, whether they could be time travelers. Obviously, that's usually new to them, because most people do just default to the space travel explanation. So yeah, that usually I see some eyes open and some little light bulbs go on above their heads, and they're like, And especially if they've had any background in anthropology, human evolution, human biology, like it's more intuitive if they have that base of information regarding our evolution and physiological form through time.
Yeah, I remember watching a documentary, Mary Rodwell in Australia, and she was going around to universities doing lectures and debating, like some universities were inviting her to debate the existence of extraterrestrials. And this was back in 2010, but you could see in the audience, like the kids are all like smirking and talking. And it was very disheartening back in 2010, because it's still like 7 years away from the article breaking out in New York Times. And just to see what, the students, their expectations of a lecture, like they obviously sided with their teacher, who was like, you're clearly out of your mind. It was trying to make a circus out of this.
Yeah,
and there's only
that's
like
not fair. That's not a good debate scenario.
No. And that's what I worried
There's obviously
about
bias in that.
Yeah. So that's not happening.
It was quite the opposite.
Then. Okay.
No, I mean, it's anecdotal, obviously. I can only speak to my own experience, but it's been the opposite. It's, highly engaged and lots of really informed questions. So yeah, no, not the snickering or the giggling in the background, just like, this is not what I expected to be talking about today in class, but this is great. You kind of get that vibe. So yeah, and I think it'll continue. Honestly, I don't see why that would go back. Even you look at the news. Like I've done tons and tons of these like news interviews, various cities for various things, and they introduce it, and it's always like, UFOs from another world, and then that's their little segue, and that's even changing. I've seen that a lot less when they're introducing pieces, and obviously News Nation, they take it seriously, so you're not going to have that. But even local news with somewhat uninformed people that are hosting these conversations are starting to kind of get past the giggle factor, which is good to see.
That is good. I don't know. We didn't really have like a set agenda for this conversation we articulated beforehand, but I was wondering if we could walk through maybe the argument of your book, the extra-tempestria model, and maybe laid out the argument pretty clearly and poke at it a little bit and see where you think it engages with other sort of explanations that are similar, like the extraterrestrial hypothesis or whatever. Would that be okay with you for the combo?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, there's probably a lot of people listening that aren't really familiar with the idea. But it's a pretty simple, I would even argue, intuitive idea, where you have this long history of evolution on this planet that led to us now. And then if that continues, we're likely to look and act and have technology that's as advanced as, and probably the exact same technology as these visitors, these travelers, what I refer to as extra-tempestrials, because I think rather than coming from a different planet, they're coming from the future and traveling back through time to visit and study their own hominin evolutionary past. And there's a lot of indications of that. It's hard to give the elevator pitch because the information in this book is multidisciplinary. It looks at a lot of different fields of study to make this case. But the main line of reasoning, at least where I started from, regards our evolution, our craniofacial evolution and postcranial as well. But I mostly focus on the head because that's what my PhD and a lot of my research was about.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. This is an area of like prior expertise that you already had, the evolution of the human, cranium.
Yeah. So my whole,
especially.
Right. My thesis looked at both human variation and craniofacial form, and mostly looking at the eye orbits, because we have this expanding neurocranium, an enlarged brain, and then a reduced and retracted mid and lower face. So I wanted to see what's going on, not just with the orbits, but the eyes too, and whether there could be a relationship with juvenile onset myopia, astigmatism, and a number of other ocular characteristics, because we do see, especially in East Asian populations who have even more accentuated traits like that, where they have bigger, rounder heads and smaller faces, they have upwards of 80 to 90% myopia rates. So it's extremely common in those populations that have this craniofacial form that's more characteristic of our derived evolutionary process. So that was kind of the main focus. But then I also traveled around these museums in South Africa and Europe and Cleveland, Ohio, and studied skulls of our ancestors to see how that aspect of our physiology changes through time. So yeah, it's, obviously that knowledge is in place with regard to what's going on. And then you just run the clock forward. The same traits, the same trends that characterize the last 6 to 8 million years, if they continue into the future, and there's no reason to think they wouldn't, because regardless of where we lived or what our culture, political, or economic system was like, we were still evolving the same suite of characteristics in our craniofacial form. So if those continue into the future, we are eventually going to look like these archetypal gray aliens. And that was kind of the focus of the first book. But then in my second one, the extra-tempestria model, I recognized that a lot of the individuals that are seen are human, just like us. And in fact, the Dr. Edgar Mitchell-Free study demonstrates that with surveys of contactees and abductees. So I started to realize that this is likely going to happen much earlier than I previously thought, that we're not just talking about 40, 50, 60,000 years, but we're likely going to be doing this, that we may be doing it now, to be honest. And it's not just when we invent a time machine. We could get picked up by anyone from our future and taken back as far as they could go, and we're still the time travelers. Even if we didn't create the device, if it exists at any point in our future, we're now a part of their future and our relative past. So it's not just like, when are we going to start doing this, but at what point do we become aware of it in a long-term evolutionary temporal context? And I think that's actually coming. I think we're watching that happen as we speak.
That's such a mind loop. You know what I mean? Like, you start thinking about all the implications that can mean. Where does it go? As a philosophy, teacher, it's just like, you try to think about the implications of it. Like, what does that mean? You're tempering with yourself or the species. And that's huge. Like, when I read the book, actually, your book came in 2 days after I was done the interview with you. So actually, I listened to you read the book to me through the audio version, which I highly recommend. Michael's got a nice voice, and if you're into falling asleep at night to somebody reading a book, Mr. Masters, welcome back to Mr. Masters.
The extra-tempestral model.
ASMR with Mr. Masters.
Yeah, every now and then it comes on in my truck because we did a road trip to Ohio and my wife wanted to hear it. So we put it on the iPod, and she listened to it as we were driving through the UP of Michigan. But it'll every now and then come on. It's really weird to hear your own voice coming through your truck radio. Yeah,
it's like the most disgusting feeling is to hear yourself or to see yourself. It's like, that's what I look like. That's what I sound like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, I was in a band for 10 years. Yeah, I was in a band for 10 years. And I remember the first time I listened to one of our recordings, and I was like, man, you sound so different, singing a song or speaking. It's just, you get used to it after a while, but the first few times are super weird.
Yeah, I think it's a natural thing. I think even Celine Dion doesn't like the sound of her own voice. I think it's just a natural thing for us. We're not meant to listen to our own shit, right? Yeah, no. Yeah. But we're not something
completely different.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
It's uncanny also feeling like you're outside of yourself because you're either seeing yourself or hearing yourself from a completely different vantage. It's like sort of,
yeah, it's bizarre. But no, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I definitely recommend the audiobook for both of my books. I recorded both of them. And because, especially with the first one, it's kind of technical. There's more big words and things. So I kind of try to explain those. And that a lot of people have told me it's dense and they have to go look up words and stuff. And I try to provide enough context where you don't have to do that. But I think with the audio version, it sort of bypasses a lot of that. You can just kind of flow with it and hear what's being discussed without getting hung up on all of the nuanced terms that are in there.
Yeah.
How do you handle footnotes in an audiobook?
You don't.
Oh, good.
You just they're in the PDF that's attached, but you don't. I don't really reference them. I would reference images because there were a number of images in the first one, so I would talk about those. like see image 5-1, that kind of thing. But with footnotes, there's something like 480 references in that book, so it'd just be impossible to reference all of those while reading. It's a nightmarish process in general. I don't know how many people have recorded anything that lengthy, but especially because with all of the equipment, the technology, it picks up every little sound. So I recorded the first one in my office on campus, and people walking by, hitting the window, hitting the doors, and it's just every little thing gets picked up. But it's, I end up reading these probably about 20 times, like the entire book, because you just have to go back over and, if any little pop or click in your voice or any outside sound, chickens were a big problem in the last one.
Oh my God.
Cut out a lot of chicken sounds.
What a nuisance. I remember talking to an audiobook like exec or somebody, or she was a director for audiobook recording at Audible, and she said that when authors want to do their own narration, she really hates it because they have like no idea what the etiquette or prep is. She's talking about some philosopher that I won't name. She said that every time he comes in, it's as if he's just eating an enormous bowl of chili, like he's got all his guttural sounds coming up. So I'm sure that you have better etiquette than that, though.
I do. And you kind of learn, like, I remember I had this like 64-gallon jug of hot tea, and you sort of get used to like knowing when you can drink and like before your mouth gets all dried out. And there's a lot of weird sounds that we make that are just too quiet that we usually don't hear them. But when you have a high quality microphone and the gain's turned up and you hear everything, and it's so annoying. And I'm kind of I wouldn't say like an audio Nazi per se, but I like things to be clean, and we produced a full-length album with a 6-person band a few years back, and like just going through that process, you start to really pay attention to the fine details of these. And obviously, I produced these books myself. They're not going to be as good as someone that's a professional at Audible, but I feel like they're pretty decent.
Yeah.
Sorry, boys. Yes.
Welcome
back.
back.
Out spit there. That was awesome.
Oh, well,
like I gotta pause this and stop the video because I'm about to go red. So yeah, that was awesome.
Well, we carried you through there, big buddy. Don't you worry about it.
I appreciate it. In case of another emergency. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you made it. One question I wanted to throw at you, like give some context for this, is in other interviews you've talked about like the origin of this extra-tempestral model being earlier in your life, or not the origin, but maybe a catalyst for it, is this experience you had as a kid where you sort of visually in your mind's eye saw that kind of iconic image of like the small chimp, and then the larger chimp, and then like Homo erectus, and then the human. We've all seen that sort of like progressive image, and then to the right of the human, you sort of envision the gray alien, the Whitley Strieber sort of gray alien thing. And it made me wonder, as I was like kind of putting my academics hat on, how do you handle the concern internally that you might just be chasing a neat idea you had as a kid and making the evidence fit that? Is that like a criticism that you hear, that like academic voice in your head raising?
Oh, from day one. Yeah, I've mentioned this a lot in a number of different conversations where obviously then you have the potential for selection bias and confirmation bias. And I was always even before I went through a graduate school and, kind of learned about all of these different things that are limiting factors regarding the pursuit of knowledge. That was an obvious one, even at a young age. Like, am I just looking for pieces that fit because I want them to fit? And it was kind of the opposite. Like I flipped the script and went in very critical. And every class I took, because of my degree and what I was doing, initially in physics and astronomy, and then in biological anthropology, I was going into it hoping to find something that would just shatter the model, because I was skeptical. I was interested in it and I thought it had enough merit to pursue, but I also, was very aware of the fact that yes, there's a potential for confirmation bias, but also, it's falsifiable. I guess I was looking for something that would falsify it, and that didn't happen, not because I saw something and I was like, ooh, let's, brush that aside. I was actively looking for such things. And really, the more I learned, the more I was like, this does kind of make sense, and like I said, the first book was multidisciplinary. So not just in a biological anthropology capacity, but with regard to astrobiology and how organisms would evolve on separate planets, with regard to travel and communication and breathing our air and what they might look like, and all of these other aspects of physics and astronomy. So yeah, no, it's something that's been kind of a lifelong pursuit, and I've yet to find that thing that would derail the entire idea. It's still possible, obviously. I'm still open to that, but thus far it's been just adding bits to it that continues to help it grow and help my conceptualization, having these conversations too, meeting people and having them, throw out their ideas or why they think this might not actually be valid. And then I can incorporate that and see how, the idea grows and changes. So yeah, no, that's a great question. And I have been very aware of that throughout the process.
Can I play that role a little bit of the person who doesn't believe? It's not exactly
Of course,
my position that I take, but like sort of as the academic game that we play and like to explore your
ideas.
Yeah,
absolutely.
What would falsify? You think, like, what evidence could we find right now that would falsify and show that your model is just not right in some way?
Well, I think if we found humanoid life on another planet, because a big part of my argument is that you wouldn't have upright walking humans develop on another planet with a different distance from its sun, different gravity, especially because the vast majority of exoplanets are much larger than Earth. Roughly 94% of them are larger than Earth. But if on one of these planets we did discover humanoid life or something even close to it, I would feel like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be both, that you can't have time travel and also extraterrestrials who happen to evolve to look like us coming from another planet. But it would definitely make me reconsider how much of the model or how much of the phenomenon could be explained by this particular extra-tempestria model. So things like that. I think, really, if they show up in the next 3 to 5 years and they're like, well, actually, we are from these different planets. And for a lot of people, I talk in my second book about a biology professor, Michael D. Swartz, who's been very active in the UFO community for decades, very well respected, who wrote 2 papers that are criticisms of this idea. This tempo knots, UFO knots, I think is what he called them. But he invoked the Betty Hill case as something that really not necessarily falsifies this model, but makes us think, could this actually be people from other planets? And with regard to your initial question about confirmation bias, selection bias especially, I included the Betty and Barney Hill case in my second book to discuss these ideas by Michael D. Swartz and these criticisms, and I sort of break those down. And he honestly makes a very good case for this model as he's trying to diminish it or put evidence against it out there into the world. But what's really interesting is that even Betty Hill thinks they're future humans. Somebody sent me this video recently, and I can send you a link if you want to put it in the show notes.
I would love that. Yeah,
that'd be cool.
It's Betty Hill sitting with this bust she had made of what these visitors looked like. Classic big head, big eyes, small face. And she took it to a biological anthropologist at a university, I don't remember where. And he's like, oh, that's what humans will look like in about 20,000 years. And so she, the person who's often touted as the bastion of the extraterrestrial model, because, she says they came from this other planet. They showed her star map, which I also discuss at length in that book. But she's now convinced that they're also future humans. And a lot of people aren't aware of that video or aware that the person we've held up as, they're from another planet is now on team time travel. So yeah, I'll send you a link to that after the show. And I think it's really interesting to see. It's pretty, from when she's in late life, she's holding this bust and talking about how they're time travelers. It's pretty funny.
So, I think that it might be helpful for listeners because the UAP community can be pretty testy with one another. But it might be helpful just as a piece of context to know that, like,
really, I haven't noticed.
You haven't noticed. So, like, if Michael D. Swartz is writing articles criticizing you, that's not necessarily an unfriendly thing or an unhelpful thing for you. Like, we don't
Well,
always
wait.
write
I should have
papers.
given context there. He wrote these papers. He wrote these papers in 1985 and 1990.
Oh, okay. So not directly critical of you, but they are critical of
No,
the
not at all.
particular view.
No, I pulled them out because, yeah, someone who's on the board of directors at the SCU, who's friends with Michael D. Swords, sent them to me. Like, oh, I thought you might be interested to see these. So I was responding to his papers from the 80s and 90s in the context of this model and what he says, because I think it is important to bring in these criticisms and not just brush stuff like that aside.
Sure, yeah, but even in general, if people are criticizing ideas, I mean, that's kind of like the part of the fun and what's helpful about it is figuring out where the rough spots or weaknesses in an idea might be and testing it, and that kind of doesn't get done enough, or not in the spirit of like friendly collegial search for knowledge that I think is probably good about the academic community that hasn't like grown so much in the UAP community. But
No, I feel like that's changing though, a little bit at least. I do feel like
yeah,
people are more willing to engage in it. Obviously there's trolls. There's always going to be trolls, and there are a lot of them in the UFO community. But there's
and in
also a
academia.
lot of yeah, absolutely. But there's also a lot of people who really are interested in getting to the bottom of this and figuring it out. And you do see more of that civil dialogue amongst those individuals, whether they have an academic background or not. They're still, you really just have to have logical reasoning and critical thinking skills. It's really all it takes. But unfortunately, there's also a lot of belief in the UFO community.
Yeah,
People want to
right.
believe something, and then that sort of blinds them to a lot of other potential realities. And early on, I feel like that's changed too. Early on, back in 2018, when I started having these conversations, I oftentimes had to make a very clear distinction between belief and scientific knowledge, because there was so much of it. People just wanted to believe UFOs are real. Now we know they are, and they wanted to believe they're from another planet or they're from time or whatever. So it's important to recognize any of those biases. And like we were just talking about, I do that as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be what I sort of embraced Hal Puthoff's idea is extra or ultra-terrestrials. I think that paper that came out last year, where he advocates that we start with these various models, and then as more evidence becomes available, we start to whittle them away. We get rid of the ones that don't fit the data, and I think that's a really good approach. And he talks about the crypto, the ultra, the jinn, the genies, the time travel model. And I think all of them are on the table until there's a reason for them not to be. I think that's a really good approach, and we should all sort of take that idea. And I think one that we can throw out instantly is the breakaway civilization idea. Just, it makes no sense. There's no evidence for it archaeologically. And you're not going to have complex come before simple unless they have possession of a time machine that allows them to jump over, take that long evolution that led to complex, and then jump over to a time of simple that predates that. But otherwise, you're not going to have, Homo erectus sneaking off, going into a cave and developing spacecraft. It just doesn't make sense in that classic crypto-terrestrial breakaway civilization kind of idea. And again, there's no evidence for that. We would definitely see a large scale civilization in the archaeological record if it did actually exist.
Yeah, and I've never believed in that either. The whole Atlantis, they're from Atlantis or whatever. I'm not a big believer in that. Obviously, I've never really delved into the subject much, but maybe it's my own biases. I mean, we all have biases in this field, unfortunately, but I haven't been convinced of that theory. I've seen it on shows, Ancient Aliens and stuff, but
sure. Well, I mean, Atlantis could be real too if you had future humans with highly advanced civilization technology who went back to a pristine time in Earth's history. And this is a recurring theme in my last book, Revelation, the Future Human Past, where they do exactly that. They go back in time to a time that predates a cataclysm or just us causing all this earth fuckery with climate change and pollution and whatnot, and then exist there at a time that predates even people inventing boats 70,000 years ago. Occupy an island that no one is going to reach because we haven't even invented boats yet. So you could exist in this pristine pre-Anthropocene environment if you have the technology to get back there from the future. So I think in that case, Atlantis could be real. These legends may have some validity, but in the way it's oftentimes discussed, no, I don't think that's even possible.
It's crazy though, if you think about how many of these prehistoric sightings, events, abductions that have taken place that we misconstrued as religious or supernatural events that manifested into a religion, even if it was like a short-lived cult. It's like something in the past that we have no records of. Just how much activity this has been part of our existence and evolution that we misconstrued and then build a religion around it, right? The gods are coming down. I spoke to the gods, well, an abductee or whatever, right? So it's crazy, but I keep thinking about that. I'm like, that's funny. It might have shaped a lot of the fundamentals of civilization based off of contact with a higher up, right?
I know that book I just mentioned, my most recent one came out about 3 months ago. The Atlantis thing is kind of a recurring theme. Yeah, it's a satirical novel, but what you just described is sort of at the root of that book. It's about these contact cases with time traveling future humans, and a lot of religions are the direct result of that. And yeah, I mean, obviously Ezekiel is a classic example, but there's so many. If you look at even Jesus, the characteristics that are described in this individual are almost identical to what these future humans, as I call them, are capable of doing with the telepathy, the healing, future knowledge, all of these things, the ability to walk on water. That's super easy with the levitation of these light beams that clearly is seen all over the world in abduction cases where people are taken through up into trees, through roofs, through walls. So all of these things could be very easily accomplished with the UFO. And then the question is intent. Did they intend to create these religions, or was it just a byproduct of them being a part of the past and interacting with the past? And I think there's an argument to be made that they probably did, that they knew.
So is that a hypothetical reading of Jesus for you? Is that a hypothetical reading, or do you actually think that's?
No, I actually do think I do think that's the case. I think Jesus was a future human time traveler. And I grew up in the church. I grew up with very religious, fundamentalist Christian parents. So I know all the stories, all that stuff was beaten into my head from a very early age. It's not just trying to ascribe these traits to this individual in the historical record, but there are a number of things that seem to overlap, not just in Christianity, but like angels, the angel Archangel Gabriel, who came down and told Mary beforehand that, you'll have this visitation and then you'll become pregnant. All of those things happen in the UFO phenomenon constantly, So again, the future knowledge, the telepathy through dreams, even if it's not a physical visitation, like with Gabriel all the time. There's just so many examples. There's this I wish I could remember the author, but there's this really interesting article called Paranormal Jesus, where this is an academic somewhere in the US. I forget where exactly, but it's worth looking up. It's a really interesting paper that looks at all of these aspects of Jesus in the context of how we understand the paranormal today. And I just took it a step farther and said, well, a specific aspect of the paranormal, this time travel ability, the abilities of these craft seem to correlate with what that individual was, what that historic figure was, and what they could do. So I do think it's actually, I do actually believe that. I know it sounds crazy, but
is it Richard Lewis's,
crazier than that?
The paranormal Christian?
Yeah. No, that's not. I don't remember. I'll just look it up. We can cut this out too if you need to.
No, no worries. You know what? And I agree with you. Even the whole the Mary thing, saying the spirit of the Lord will come visit you at night. Very typical of alien abduction. Light shows up. All of a sudden, she's pregnant. Right? She can't explain how she got pregnant. We know for a fact that there are pregnancies that are amongst abductees, women, for about 3 months. And then after 3 months, there's another visitation and they're no longer pregnant. In this case, might have been, you get to keep the child for whatever reason. Even the one that to me, I think is even linked to this as well, is that it describes, and I forget which gospel talked about it, but that her husband, Joseph, was going to leave her because, like, obviously you're pregnant with some other dude's baby. I'm not having you. And then he had a dream that the angel showed up and said, "Don't leave her. We got her pregnant, or the Lord got her pregnant, whatever." And you're like, okay, that's interesting. It's always at night when they're sleeping. And that pattern even of visitations at night in your room from entities, like you mentioned in your book, is rampant throughout history. Every culture has that. Even
yeah.
I was going to say John Mack.
Christianity. It's almost like Christianity was untouchable. You know, we're not allowed to talk about that. We're not even allowed to talk about religion and politics at Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner, you know? So obviously to come out and say Jesus is a time traveler, the Archangel Gabriel is, you know, Ezekiel, that one's fine. We're all comfortable with that apparently because of ancient aliens or whatever. But look at it, just step back and look at it objectively. Look at all of these stories in the context of what we know about the UFO phenomenon. And there's an insane level of overlap. The guy's name, by the way, is Dale Allison. I just looked it up. We had a conversation back and forth, and I told him about this idea too. I was like, you know, what do you think about whether Jesus could be a time traveler? It in accord with your model about the paranormal stuff, he talks about all the same things, the healing and the, you know, the walking on water, making fish bread appear out of nowhere. All of those things could easily be done with that technology. And he was like, yeah, I never thought about that. I don't know enough about the UFO phenomenon to say, but it, you know, it does kind of make sense. So he wasn't embracing it, but he wasn't poo-pooing on it either.
Right.
What it seems to me is that like there's this in the world of like studying strange things, there's this like massive web of weird phenomena, and we kind of draw clusters around it and say, well, that's a UFO phenomena. Even sometimes when a UFO isn't involved, like if a strange being shows up in your room at night and takes you somewhere, we sort of group that together with UFOs, and we don't necessarily have to, but that's kind of how we do it. And then there's like Bigfoot, and then there's religious phenomena and angels and sort of glitches in the matrix phenomena, all this stuff. And what we can do sometimes is pick one sort of corner or one cluster and give it primacy and say that's the one that explains all the other ones, right? And in this case, it's like we're saying the UAP phenomena, we have a model for it, we have a theory, time travel, and using that we can sort of explain all the other weird phenomena in it, because they all ultimately reduce to this. Religion reduces to that, and maybe that's true. One consequence of it, though, is that you are like choosing some aspects of the religious view of Jesus, that he actually did walk in water, but you're gutting it of any of its own like self-explanation that, well, Jesus was the Son of God, like the literal Son of God, which I don't think is actually in the text, but it's in the pretty early development of Christian
I don't think
theology.
so. I don't agree. I don't think they're mutually exclusive like that. You can understand all of those aspects of what's in the scripture along with an explanation for how they may have been doing these physically. I don't think it takes away from any of that at all. And in fact, I think it just adds complexity and an explication to it.
Okay,
I don't see it as like just brushing things aside. I'm saying it wraps it together and
I don't mean brushing it aside.
Way.
I agree. You're not brushing it aside, but you're sort of concatenating or organizing things in a way such that one thing explains the other and is the reason for the other. So then, like, if we follow the chain back, it seems like time travel is sort of somebody got into a time machine somewhere, and that's sort of how the Jesus story started. But we might ask, like, well, before Jesus got in the time machine, was he born of a virgin then? Was he actually the Son of God in any like theological sense then, or was he just a person that got into a time machine?
I'm not saying Jesus was the one going back. Clearly Jesus was the one born in that time, but who's his dad?
Oh, okay. So the spirit of the Lord that that made Mary with child is the time traveler in this sort of imagined God. Story of it. Okay,
that's your God. Jesus is Mary's baby daddy.
So then is there a God then? You see how it like pushes those questions back. I don't have any particular
what is God? Yeah, you have to, I mean, nobody knows what God is, but I would put God as a highly evolved human consciousness. that may or may not even have a body. Maybe it's so far in advance that it's sort of an ethereal consciousness in the unmanifested realm. I think, the word God itself carries a lot of baggage, but I do think there's some sort of highly enlightened, and I think light is at the root of this, highly enlightened consciousness that is what we perceive as God. And it's the same one in every culture, in every religious belief system, especially Eastern mysticism. I think a lot of Eastern religions came closer to understanding it. We sort of impose, in Western religions especially, impose, the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, but make it more of a physical thing. And maybe it is. I mean, to impregnate a woman, you got to have sperm, So there may be an extremely highly evolved, highly conscious human in the future that knocked up Mary and made Jesus, and then the whole story grows out of that. But I'm not just focused on Jesus. I think the entirety of most spiritual belief systems are just that's what started this conversation. As Jason said, that you got to wonder how much these things ended up in the past and then grew into all these massive religions or little cults, and religion is just cult plus time that may have disappeared. This is one that prospered because of the murder, death, kill that allowed it to, and the Crusades and everything else. So I think we need to take that idea seriously, and I did. That's most of the impetus for this last book.
Well, even
the novel.
Our last guest,
the
novel,
that we had Matthew Roberts on, and his experience is he woke up, middle of the night, and there's an entity in his room. And then he falls back asleep. He has a sex dream about an ex of his. And then when he wakes back up to consciousness, this entity's on top of him, and it's clearly female. And it's in a sexual act with him. But it's giving him this false memory or dream that you're just dreaming about sex dream, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that would be a standalone case, but it's not. This has happened to several males.
Yeah, so Whitley Strieber as well.
Yeah. And this other gentleman, Mary Rodwell, interviewed in her documentary, My Mom Talks to Aliens. This gentleman's in Australia, and he was 19 years old when it happened to him. His parents were having a barbecue in the backyard. He's in the house taking a nap. So it's not just at nighttime. This is what freaks me out. This could be at any time during the day. But that is scary because you think, okay, well, if this is happening to males, then the females reporting that they're all of a sudden pregnant. There's even women that are in lesbian couples that are not attracted to males at all, have no males in their life, and they end up pregnant. They can't attest to it. They don't understand. So for me,
even the CIA acknowledged that this is a real aspect of the UFO phenomenon.
Where?
And I could find it for you, but I read in an article last year where the CIA is listing all of these different things associated with UFOs in this publication, and one of them was unexplained pregnancies, and it's so common that you just can't ignore it, and it doesn't matter who's looking into it. That's a very, very common thing. The ubiquity of gamete extraction, males, females, developing fetuses. I mentioned one case in my second book of Jerry and another woman in Manchester, UK. I forget her name, which is weird because I wrote that book. But they describe having this happen to them where they're pregnant and then the developing fetus is taken. Was one time this woman was told she had a doctor's appointment. She went into this place where they told her to go, and she looked later for follow-up, and there was no record of this place or these people ever existing. They tricked her into coming there in order to take the fetus out that was developing. She estimates, not her, but Jerry, the other individual, estimates that this happened 30-35 times throughout their life. So they're doing something. There's a reason for this.
And how is that not suffering? Right?
How
is that not suffering as a result?
I spent a lot of time in that chapter talking about the ethics, the morals, the human rights violation aspect of it. It was a big part of my talk in Cincinnati at the MUFON symposium last month. And
it should be addressed. Good for you for addressing it. Absolutely.
Yeah, because the question is friend or foe. That was the main theme at this conference. And you can't look at it with rose-tinted glasses. You have to recognize that some people, even though the majority of people, according to the Dr. Edgar Mitchell study, the majority of people do enjoy their experience, or it's benign. And with repeated contact, then they come to embrace it and even want more contact in the future. But yeah, some people are horrified by it and have a terrible experience. And even this woman, Jerry, came to understand that what she was experiencing, even though it was horrific throughout her entire life, and she was taken with her children once, and she was powerless to do anything about it. You see your child suffering, being horrified by what's taking place. That would gut you as a parent, you know. But she came to realize that she's a part of something bigger. She almost felt chosen. And so, you know, maybe that's just our psychology trying to justify something or get through it in some way. But, you know, she eventually came to that realization that I'm a part of something beautiful, something bigger, that I'm, yes, being used and violated, but the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And she was one of the few that was, you know, I hate to use the word sacrificed, but made sacrifices in order to help further whatever that mission is.
Matthew Roberts came to a similar conclusion in our last interview with him. I mean, he has these experiences that obviously just shake the hell out of him. Initially and disturb him. And I mean, he talked about going into really deep depression and crying a lot and things, and now he's at a point where he feels like he went through a process of initiation into something. I mean,
I recommend if you read, it's co-authored by Strieber and Jeffrey Kripal. It's called The Supernatural, and Whitley talks about this exact thing, where at first, you know, he's pissed, he's being raped. He used the word rape when they stuck the anal probe in his butt, but then over time, you know, he came to embrace it. He sort of almost fell in love. Like, he was married and he loved his wife Anne very much, but he had one of these nocturnal sex experiences, and it was so mind-blowing, so powerful, that he, you know, really wanted more contact with not just that individual, but these people. You know, the higher consciousness that they espouse is obviously very interesting to people and sort of compelling. So yeah, he would go back behind his cabin calling out to them, like, please come back. So he went from, you know, feeling so violated to really longing for further interactions, which I think is interesting. And yeah, like you said, a lot of people go through that same process.
It's almost like they're told you signed up for this, or you willingly are participating to this. They're just reminding you of it. Yeah. And you come back, you got no recollection. It is so weird, but it is a theme amongst the abductees. And I always think, you know, we're making progress with the general population accepting that these crafts are here, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Once they find out how much interactions they actually have with individuals. And again, I mentioned this before in previous podcasts, when they did a Roper poll in the 1990s, and they estimated that 1 out of 50 people could be abductees. 1 out of 50. But that's the 1990s. If people were a lot more open, it'd probably be closer to about 2 out of 50 people are abductees. And that's huge when you put that in context of thinking a Greyhound bus has 48 to 52 seats. That means that if you fill a bus, 2 people in a bus, any bus, are abductees, right?
Yeah.
So that's huge. That is a huge number. And the thing is, most people don't remember what happened. Most people have to go under hypnotherapy to remember even, you know, what took place between the hours I can't remember. Why is it that, you know, like you explained, in, you know, so brilliantly, is it that the ship has a time dilation that somehow it's affecting, you know, it's fucked up, but it's affecting our reality, or that they were actually missing for 2 hours and they were gone for 2 hours and they just can't remember it. It's crazy. But even talking to Terry Lovelace, which was one of my favorite interviews with an abductee, and he mentioned he when he's alert, he's on the table and it's like an auditorium full of grays just looking at him, like one of those old school, you know, med tables where all the doctors would look around, right?
Operating theater, I think.
Yeah.
Is what they're called.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. This way, you got to stay on and catch my words, and you know, you speak Jasonisms. I love it.
Jasonisms.
But he mentioned like the doctor or whatever it is, the leader that takes charge, looked down over him, and just like the eyes were looking at him, and as he's screaming, like he's just and who wouldn't, obviously. This thing told him telepathically, "Oh, shut up. You know, we always put you back." That's okay. Yeah. That's the closest thing to a joke that I've heard from any great contactee, right?
Oh, they're funny. They have a sense of humor. I think it's we oftentimes overlook that, but the trickster element, or just the little subtle things they do indicate they're funny. And I heard Duncan Trussell talking to Chris Bledsoe in an interview recently, and he said, why wouldn't they be? Clearly they're highly intelligent. And he was like, all of the intelligent people I know are hilarious. You just have a different way of conceptualizing things and thinking about it. So yeah, we would expect them to kind of have a sense of humor. And obviously we're talking about individuals and individual souls and personalities. So you'd expect variation. Some are probably cold and methodological. Some are probably, more lighthearted and don't take it all so seriously. And those individuals, are clearly funny, have a sense of humor. I think
I'm just not sure I would expect us
too.
to get their humor if they're so far more intelligent than us. I mean, whatever reference
Well,
to whatever structure
it depends on
takes.
what time they might be coming back from. They could be very proximate to us, and I think if they are human, why wouldn't we? We could go back and crack jokes with a Neanderthal and still make them laugh in various ways. So yeah, I think if we're disconnected, it doesn't mean that and maybe humor transcends a lot of those things. Maybe it's a way of sort of communicating with us, or I don't know. I do think that's something that's often overlooked, because we think about, there's still the stereotype of someone being drugged out of their bed, anally probed, subject to these horrific things. That's not the reality of the situation for the vast majority of people. That's actually, they're taking care of. A pattern that I noticed, I talk about in my second book, is the screen memories, the amnesia, the apathy. Those seem to correlate with the valence of the interaction. If it was a horrific experience, there's a lot of screaming and pain, then they make people forget. If they're enjoying themselves, they get tours of the ship. They oftentimes sit down and have conversations at tables, talking about who they are, and they're allowed to remember everything. So I do think that it's done not to mask who they are, but to help the individual be able to deal with the ontological shock that results from this experience and how much it challenges reality. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, as well as the humor, when things are clearly a joke. And something I'd like to circle back to is, Jason, your comment about how people are almost told, like, you agreed to this, you signed up for this, and don't you remember, And then that really gets at what is a person, what's inside that body. Are we all just souls that get put down here from this unmanifested realm, this God world, possibly a computer simulation, who knows what it is, but what is this physical reality? What are we doing here? Every night when we go to sleep, are we uploading information to that realm from this physical world to help evolve consciousness? And so, yeah, I think that's a really important question that may get at the root of who these individuals are, why some are selected, why some aren't. You came here to do this, you came here to occupy this role, don't you remember? And then, it just opens up all of these other questions about who we even are as people, as spiritual beings.
And is it selective too, right? You got to think about that. Is it only selective to a few people that have signed up to do this, that are from whatever, or is it everyone, right?
Yeah.
Or is it open across the board? Even we were mentioning about like what the purpose of a hybrid would be. And I mentioned this before. It's like a harbinger, right? It's the guy in between the two species that can unite the two species. It's part of the two. The same if you think from a religious point of view, Jesus is half human, half God. He was the in-between, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing. I fear that ufology can become a religion. And we're going to get actually into that in our Patreon here soon. But that is the main thing, is that there are key takeaways from these experiences. They're all not negative, a lot of positive. There's a lot of people that have come back from these experiences and they're able to do things they've never been able to do. And it can be explained. Science can't explain, like, how is this possible that on one day this part of the brain got activated and all of a sudden now you're able to do things? Or
Gary Nolan's studying that in the fighter pilots,
basal ganglia being more activated. But even if you think about like the people that we talked to on the podcast that were all on the Nimitz or anything like that, look how their life changed. Kevin Day knows about like it was a geology or something like that. He understands rock and formations. He never had an interest in that before until he came home, and that had an impact on him and it activated something. Same with Sean Cahill, same with Omar Lara. Even we're talking
I had like a 2-hour conversation with a doctor that was abducted multiple times during his residency. And, he wasn't really able to remember it, but he knew something was happening. And eventually he was allowed to remember everything. Like they just flipped a switch or like put a little timestamp into his brain. But yeah, he started to have future knowledge. He started to be able to predict the future and very specific things. And he told his sister that she was going to be pregnant, what the sex of the baby would be, what the delivery room looked like. And all of those things were exactly how they were long before she ever became pregnant. So yeah, it does seemingly unlock aspects of our mind that were always there, but just not fully functional. And yeah, the telepathy thing's really interesting too. We clearly have the ability to communicate telepathically with one another, but only in the presence of those who had further evolved that aspect of their consciousness or their brains, depending on whether it's a physicalist thing or more of an energetic thing.
I think this raises the issue, which I think has been like really neglected in the past 20 years or so, of relationships between these phenomena and like phenomena that were being studied at like Stanford in the 70s or whatever with Ingo Swann and supposed telepathy things. I mean,
Stanford Research Institute,
part of that too. Yeah, it seems to me that there was good statistical evidence that just conflicted so deeply with the worldview of most of the scientific community that it couldn't be accepted, which is something that actually happens in science. I mean, it's kind of like Thomas Kuhn's structure of scientific revolution just tells you, like, whenever you come upon an anomaly, if it just doesn't fit, you just ignore it as long as you can, as hard as you can, until something forces you to grapple with it. And there's probably all sorts of dimensions to this that don't fit our sort of ontology that we still need to grapple with. One question I wanted to ask had to do with physics. I know you
I think that's going to be.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's really the next step forward is taking an ontological step back and recognizing that we don't understand this physical reality in the way we thought we did. We don't understand space and time and what's fundamental to those. So yeah, I think, when we talk about something being impossible, or it's impossible based on our knowledge of science right now, that certainly doesn't mean that it will be in the future, because we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of things we just don't understand, even with basic elements of physics, astronomy, the way the world works. It's all still a mystery. What were you going to say?
Actually, guys, what I'm going to do is we should cut the episode here. It's been about an hour or more, but I just want to get to the Patreon portion for your further question, Michael, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
And I want to obviously thank Mr. Masters for joining us today. The conversations are always good with you because we can actually get into the deeper aspects sometimes of ufology and the subjects, the deeper implications of what it all means. I mean, we're all vying for disclosure at this point. But what are the implications of disclosure? What does this really mean? And, how big of a revelation are we asking for, right? Is it going to be just a paradigm shift in our understanding of life out there, or about reality completely? That's the part that, we're all waiting for. But these are the fundamental questions that academics and philosophers and just people in general should be asking. So your insight, dude, is always amazing. And I love that you're out there fighting the good fight and talking about the subjects that should be talked about, which is the most important
really
part,
should.
right?
And I think that's happening. Yeah, it's good to see. And I appreciate
there's momentum. There's momentum. It's so good to see. Before we go, I just want to say thank you to Mark Ridgway. He's actually our first Patreon. He's in the UK. He says he listens to the podcast every day. He works delivery, I believe, in a truck. So he listens to the podcast every day. And when he heard about Patreon, just decided, well, I'll give these guys a few bucks. He didn't know he was the first guy to sign up. And now he's encouraged.
Shout out.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty awesome. He's going to join
thank you,
the
Mark.
local, investigative team in his local area. So he wants to become active as an investigator. He's got the momentum to do that. And so we're encouraging him to do that, of course. And anything he needs, he's got us, of course. I thank everybody for your patience as we got this podcast put back together here. But we are fully back together, I guess is the right word. The band's back together, baby. And we are going to be back on Apple soon. So for your Apple listeners, bear with us. We're working on that, but we're everywhere else right now. And we're going to get good guests like Michael Paul Masters coming back on. And of course, we're going to delve a little bit deeper with the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies. I think there's a lot of people within that group that should be having more of a platform than they have. And I'd love to have them on as well. You both are part of that coalition too. So, congratulations and thank you for doing that. Not everybody is willing to do that, right? So that's freaking awesome. To the listeners, thank you so much. You can find this second part. It won't be as long, but it'll be on Patreon with Dr. Michael Paul Masters. Anything you want to say to the audience right now about your newest book just dropped out? Let's promote that a little bit.
Just real quick. It's like I said, it's a satirical time travel science fiction novel. Very, very, very different from the first two. So if you're looking for part 3 of that series, this is it is actually, so I would consider it hard science fiction. So it brings a lot of the same science from my first 2 books in, but in the context of obviously a story, a novel, a fictitious situation that honestly may not be all that fiction. A lot of times we think of how science fiction becomes reality. This may sort of mirror a lot of things that could potentially take place. And like we were talking about earlier with regard to religion, and the question of cataclysm is a big theme in this book too. So I've been told it's funny. Some have even used the word hilarious. So if you're up for a different kind of story about the UFO phenomenon, then I would definitely recommend it.
I recommend your books as well. You're a great writer. And I think seriously, and I was joking about the voice read over ASMR, but you definitely do have a nice voice. And it's nice to, because some people don't. In my case right now, I sound like a croaking frog. But it's, it's great to be able to not only write your books, but be able to read them to your audience as well. And to go to your lectures, wherever that you're lecturing, having somebody has a nice voice goes a long way, right?
Puts people to sleep though. That's the downside.
Stephen Hawking knew what to do. You know what I mean? He knew what the audience wanted and he gave it to them. But awesome. So we're going to continue part 2 on Patreon. We thank you so much for coming on UAP Studies podcast, and we'll go for part 2.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great talking to you, fellas. Appreciate it.